For decades, America lived alongside a shadowy secret wrapped inside glossy black capsules known as Black Beauties. A so-called diet pill that seemed harmless at first glance, yet was in fact pure amphetamine, a substance that once pushed millions into an addiction to productivity and the illusion of success. And tonight, as you prepare to wind down after a long day, the story you are about to hear is not merely about the rise and fall of a drug. It is an answer to a deeper question. How could a modern, lawful society, full of faith in science, lead itself into such a dangerous spiral? In this gentle journey, you will be guided through each hidden layer of history, from the origins of amphetamine, to the way Black Beauties became a cultural symbol, and finally to the consequences that forced the entire American healthcare system to change. This is not a sensational tale. It is a quiet recording of an era in which people chased energy, perfection, and control, only to lose themselves in the end. If you wish to understand why America once became addicted to a small black pill, stay with me. The story begins. And as the opening chapter of our story comes to a close, we drift gently into the first layer of history, a place where everything began long before Black Beauties ever appeared. Because to understand how a single drug could change an entire nation, we have to return to the very moment America first encountered amphetamine. A tiny compound powerful enough to shape an entire era. The early decades of the 20th century were a time when America was bursting with faith in progress. Industrialization was accelerating, cities were rising, and the rush of modern life created a world in which people believed that any problem, from fatigue and joint pain to anxiety, could be solved with science. Amid this atmosphere, amphetamine emerged like a seemingly miraculous invention. Amphetamine was first synthesized in 1927 by chemist Gordon Alice. He had not been searching for a stimulant, his original goal was simply to find a treatment for asthma. But when he tested the compound on himself, Alice discovered something far more powerful than he expected. His heartbeat quickened, his breathing sped up, his body surged with energy, and his mind felt strangely open and alert. This was no longer just an asthma medication. It was a substance capable of acting directly on the nervous system, in a way science at that time could not yet fully explain. Only a few years later, America welcomed amphetamine with the enthusiasm of a society that believed wholeheartedly in chemical miracles. Benzedrine, the first commercial amphetamine product, was sold as an inhaler, with no prescription required. Advertisements described it as a dose of energy that helped people work more efficiently, stay awake, improve their mood, and feel refreshed. Throughout the 1930s to 1950s, countless variants like Dexedrine emerged, expanding the market from laborers, students, and truck drivers to anyone who simply wanted to push back the sluggishness of urban life. But it was not until World War II that the true effects of amphetamine were fully revealed. During the war, nearly every major military force, from the United States and Britain to Japan and Germany, used amphetamine to keep soldiers awake through extended battles, to help pilots fly for hours without sleep, and to maintain alertness among command units under relentless pressure. Millions of pills were distributed across the front lines. Amphetamine was no longer a medicine but a military tool. For America, the war reshaped a core belief. If small pills could help soldiers overcome exhaustion and fear, surely they could help civilians survive the increasingly demanding pace of industrial life. After the war, as soldiers returned home, they brought with them the habit of using amphetamine as a familiar source of support, something that kept them awake, working quickly, feeling euphoric, and able to keep up with an economy expanding at full speed. This was the moment amphetamine slipped naturally, even logically, into American culture. Post-war America was entering the strongest period of economic growth in its history. Factories were running 24 hours a day. Offices needed more employees. Competition in education, business, and sports was rising exponentially. Americans were beginning to live under a new value system: work faster, work more, work better. And at the same time, they were facing stress, insomnia, fatigue, and the pressure to be perfect. In a culture like this, a pill that promised instant productivity became an irresistibly dangerous solution. The 1950s were the peak era of amphetamine prescriptions. Doctors prescribed it for depression, obesity, headaches, fatigue, for anything that lacked a clear cure. Feeling bored? Here, amphetamine. Unable to focus? Amphetamine. Want to lose weight quickly? Amphetamine. Working the night shift? Amphetamine. To such an extent that many researchers later called this period the age of chemical operation. People believed that energy was something you could buy, neatly compressed into tablets. The danger, of course, was that science had not yet fully understood the consequences of artificially increasing dopamine and norepinephrine. Reports of addiction, paranoia, and psychological breakdown began to surface, but were dismissed as rare exceptions. Because in the public consciousness, amphetamine was not a drug. It was medicine. It had pharmaceutical labels, legal advertisements, and clinical descriptions. It was prescribed by doctors, backed by manufacturers. And for that reason, America believed it had everything under control. Meanwhile, amphetamine was spreading through labor communities and the arts faster than ever before. Long-haul truck drivers used it to cross states without sleep. Touring musicians used it to perform night after night. Students used it to study through the night before exams. Factory workers used it to increase output. For them, amphetamine became a kind of social fuel, something that helped them keep pace with a nation moving ever faster. But for the story of Black Beauties, another factor was especially important: the image of American women in the mid-20th century. At that time, women bore two enormous pressures. Maintaining a slim figure in a culture obsessed with perfect bodies, and being tireless homemakers. A pill that helped them lose weight while filling them with energy sounded like a gift from modern science. And they, more than any other group, became the largest consumers of amphetamine. All these elements, industrialization, wartime conditioning, faith in science, social pressure, and the accelerating pace of life, created the perfect cultural foundation. A foundation where the right pharmaceutical product, with the right message and the right design, could explode into a nationwide phenomenon. Black Beauties did not emerge in a vacuum. They were born from this very legacy. From the belief that medicine could make people better, faster, slimmer, more efficient. From the illusion that infinite energy was something humans could possess through a single capsule. America in the 1960s was not merely ready for Black Beauties. It had spent more than 3 decades preparing itself to believe that those glossy black pills were the solution to everything it desired, and everything it feared. And so, when Black Beauties arrived, they were not just a pharmaceutical product. They were the crystallization of an era, of a shared belief, of a mistake that America would take a very long time to recognize. The next chapter, the story of how this unmistakable black capsule was created, will show what happens when a society starved for energy meets a pill that promises limitless energy. But before we arrive there, we must understand this: everything began right here, in a moment when America believed that science could solve anything, even human exhaustion. And it was precisely that belief that, sooner or later, opened the door for Black Beauties to step into history. And as the final lines of the previous chapter settle, one truth becomes clear. America at that moment was not merely ready to embrace amphetamine, it was longing for a new symbol, a product bold enough to weave science, the hunger for productivity, and the quiet insecurity surrounding the body into a single promise that fit neatly in the palm of one's hand. It was in that exact historical moment that Black Beauties stepped onto the stage. Not as an ordinary pill, but as a declaration, small, glossy, powerful, and utterly unmistakable. In 1963, the pharmaceutical company Smith, Kline and French introduced a new product called Amphetamine 20. But Americans never used that long, scientific name. They called it Black Beauties. That name did not come from the company, it came from the users themselves, a recognition that this was not just a medication, but an experience. A symbol. Something with an allure that reached far beyond its medical function. From the very first glance, Black Beauties were different. In an era when most pills came in white, yellow, or pale blue, colors meant to evoke gentleness and harmlessness, Black Beauties wore a glossy black that stood in stark contrast. The capsule was long, sleek, almost metallic under the light. That black exterior suggested mystery, strength, and a kind of challenge. It was so distinct that a single look told anyone, this was no ordinary pill. This difference, intentional or not, placed Black Beauties in a position most pharmaceutical products could only dream of. They became iconic from the moment they appeared. But there was more. Black Beauties were marketed as an advanced weight loss drug for women, and this made them strike directly at the emotional core of the society of that time. American women in the 1960s were facing a new obsession, beauty standards growing ever more unforgiving. A slim body, a narrow waist, a flawless silhouette were not merely personal desires, they had become social expectations. In that context, a pill offering a double promise, weight loss and energy, was almost exactly what many had been waiting for. Black Beauties understood that. The jet black shell seemed to say, this is not a pill for the faint-hearted. This is for those who want absolute control over themselves. Meanwhile, the name Amphetamine 20. With the 20 representing the total milligrams of amphetamine in each capsule, conveyed a sense of science, precision, and reliability. Together, these two images created a product that was both mysterious and legitimate, both powerful and doctor-approved. It was this contradiction that made Black Beauties dangerously appealing. And beneath that elegant black shell lay a deeper story about American culture. Black Beauties were not just medication. They were the physical embodiment of an era. As Americans lived faster, worked faster, and thought faster, they needed a symbol of speed. Something that carried the spirit of press the gas, switch on the motor, keep moving forward. Media of that era even described amphetamine as the future fuel of humankind. Black Beauties, with their cold, bullet-like appearance, captured that spirit perfectly. Like many cultural products, Black Beauties carried a narrative expressed through aesthetics. They were not anonymous tablets lost inside a glass bottle. They had a look people could recognize instantly, remember easily, and turn into an icon, appearing in films, songs, late-night stories, and whispered conversations at parties. Just the phrase, the black pill, was enough for an entire generation to know exactly what it meant. But what made Black Beauties even more memorable was how seamlessly they merged with the identities of the people who sought them out. For women, they symbolized control, control over weight, over energy, over emotions, and most importantly, control over how they appeared in the eyes of society. For workers, they offered a promise of strength, a push to help them survive endless shifts. For artists and the counterculture of the 60s and 70s, they represented rebellion. A dangerous, distinctive, almost forbidden badge. Each group saw Black Beauties through a different lens, but all saw exactly what they longed for. Thus, the emergence of Black Beauties was not just a pharmaceutical milestone, it was a cultural event. It marked the moment amphetamine became not merely used but mythologized. From an obscure chemical compound, it evolved into part of a social identity, tied to productivity, body ideals, and rising cultural movements. But most striking of all was this: everything happened legally. Black Beauties were not viewed as narcotics, nor were they hidden in the shadows. They sat on pharmacy shelves, in women's handbags, in office drawers, in students' backpacks. They were neatly packaged, labeled as medicine, prescribed by doctors, and considered safe when used as directed. This legality allowed Black Beauties to spread across the nation long before anyone began questioning their true danger. Looking deeper, we see that the birth of Black Beauties was the inevitable result of three converging forces. First, the growing need for energy and weight loss in modern society. Second, the pharmaceutical industry's expansion of quick-fix products built on faith in scientific solutions. Third, a consumer culture that craved iconic products, items that were not only useful but carried an image of being cool, dangerous, and not for everyone. Black Beauties did not create these trends, they simply completed the final piece of the puzzle. The black design was not only visually distinct, it created the feeling that users were stepping into a new world, a world where energy was compressed into a capsule, where the body responded instantly, and where the boundary between power and danger grew thin. It felt like a whisper, "Do you dare?" The arrival of Black Beauties, therefore, was symbolic more than scientific. It marked the moment amphetamine became part of popular culture, reshaping how Americans viewed medication, productivity, and the body. And like every powerful symbol, it carried both light and shadow. And then, as Black Beauties began to spread, the story no longer rested on their appearance or their name. Inside that black capsule was a new technology, a time-release mechanism, something that would change the entire game. An innovation the pharmaceutical industry celebrated as progress. But one that would unknowingly open the door to a nationwide epidemic. When the mysterious black shell of the Black Beauties had captivated America with its aesthetic charm and its seductive promise of weight loss, the story that came next no longer lived on the surface. To understand why this pill became an addictive cultural icon, one powerful enough to pull an entire society into a new spiral, we must look deeper, into its very core, into the chemical structure where a pharmaceutical technology once hailed as groundbreaking was quietly at work. If the glossy exterior of the Black Beauties was an invitation, then the slow-release technology was what kept people there, convincing them that this was the perfected form of amphetamine. And at that intersection between science and expectation, something large began to gather momentum. To understand the force behind the Black Beauties, we have to imagine the world before they existed. In the early 20th century, amphetamine could provide bursts of energy and euphoria, but it also brought harsh side effects that caused users to crash, a sudden collapse when the drug's effects wore off. These crashes drained the body of energy, darkened the mood, and sometimes induced temporary depression. Many described it as falling off a cliff after soaring too high. This feeling made amphetamine, despite its popularity, appear crude, intense, and difficult to control. Users were lifted quickly but dropped just as violently. The pharmaceutical industry knew this was a significant barrier to turning amphetamine into a long-term medical product, especially for target groups such as women, office workers, or anyone seeking increased productivity without obvious, overwhelming consequences. And so, extended-release technology, ion exchange resin, emerged like a key opening a new door. Inside each Black Beauty, amphetamine did not exist in its simple form. Instead, it was bound to an ion exchange resin that released the drug gradually, maintaining a steady effect for 10 to 14 hours. This technology was so advanced at the time that it was celebrated as a scientific milestone, transforming a powerful stimulant into something gentler, more durable, and easier to regulate. In theory, it was perfect. You could take a single pill in the morning and enjoy sustained energy, focus, and uplift for the entire day. And as the effects faded in the evening, the transition was smooth, avoiding the abrupt crash. To physicians, this seemed like the long-awaited answer, a way to keep amphetamine safely within the boundaries of medicine, rather than letting it be perceived as a drug of abuse. But reality never follows theory so obediently. Because once amphetamine's effects were stretched out, its intensity did not fall, its duration rose. This meant that instead of a brief high, Black Beauties held users in an elevated state for hours on end. The brain, flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine for so long, began to adapt, pushing users to increase their dose to recapture the original feeling. If traditional amphetamine was a sudden impact, Black Beauties were a continuous current, steady, persistent, difficult to detach from. This made them addictive in a far more subtle way than previous amphetamine forms. Users no longer felt a sharp on or off. They simply found themselves working better, feeling happier, moving lightly, perceiving everything as clearer and easier to navigate. They believed this was the smooth, controlled effect advertised by the manufacturer. In truth, it was a perfect illusion. Any stimulant maintained at high levels for 14 hours stretches the brain beyond its natural limits. Dopamine receptors are forced into non-stop activity. The cardiovascular system works at an unnaturally elevated pace. Sleep cycles begin to collapse. Yet because everything happens gradually, quietly, users do not recognize they are drifting into danger. This quiet mechanism made Black Beauties one of the fastest addicting amphetamine formulations in American pharmaceutical history. Not because the dosage was too high. Not because the immediate effects were too strong. But because the experience seemed so perfect that people believed nothing was wrong. Many women recalled feeling as though they were truly alive for the first time after taking Black Beauties. They cleaned the house effortlessly, felt buoyant and optimistic, their bodies light, their thoughts orderly. Long-haul drivers described the extended wakefulness as a gift. They could cross entire states without a trace of drowsiness. For those in creative fields, Black Beauties became a catalyst for all-night inspiration, allowing them to perform and produce without collapse. The most frightening thing was the smoothness itself. A drug that hits hard raises alarms. A drug that flows quietly, like water, wrapped in the legitimacy of a prescription, convinces people they remain in a safe zone. The ion exchange resin technology, originally designed to reduce harm, inadvertently pushed users into dependency faster and more intensely. Instead of the classic up and down curve, Black Beauties produced a long, straight line, and that straight line left the brain with no moments of rest, no chance to reclaim normalcy. Worse still, the extended release mechanism made dose chelation especially hazardous. If one pill produced 14 hours of alertness, 2 could keep a user awake for 30 hours. 3 could stretch into more than 40 hours without sleep, accompanied by anxiety, paranoia, racing heartbeat, and acute exhaustion. But to users accustomed to a smooth effect, increasing the dose often did not feel like a risk, just a little more to keep things steady. Even physicians believed the extended release design made Black Beauties safer, and thus prescribed them liberally. This misplaced confidence pushed millions of pills into circulation, allowing the epidemic to spread from hospitals to communities, from cities to rural regions. In truth, when a pharmaceutical technology works too well, it often conceals its own impact, until the consequences become far larger. And the Black Beauties were one of the clearest examples. This subtlety made the Black Beauties one of the most exceptional pills of the 20th century. They did not erupt with the explosive force of illegal drugs, they moved with the refined polish of high-end medical science. They did not knock users down immediately, they drew them into dependence through hours of steady, seamless stimulation. They did not shout their danger, they whispered perfection. And as society grew accustomed to operating in a perpetual state of acceleration, everything began to shift. The body shifted. Habits shifted. Lifestyles shifted. The way Americans worked, pushed themselves, measured productivity, all quietly began to revolve around the effects of this pill. But the extended-release technology was only half the story. The other half, the part that made Black Beauties even more potent than earlier generations of amphetamine, lay in the 50-50 chemical formulation, where two forms of amphetamine merged to create an effect stronger than anything before. And it was there that a new chapter of tragedy began to unfold. And once we understand how extended-release technology turned Black Beauties into a steady engine humming inside the body, we arrive at the deeper layer of the story, the chemical layer. Because if the capsule's outer shell governs the pace, then the chemical core determines the quality of the impact. And here, Black Beauties made a choice so bold it bordered on reckless, the 50-50 formula. It was more than a ratio. It was a declaration of ambition, of power, and of a desire to push the boundaries of human performance farther than ever before. The 1960s and 1970s were decades when America placed absolute faith in science and chemistry as the keys to every solution. If you were tired, take a pill. If you lacked energy, take a pill. If you needed to lose weight, to focus, to stay awake, to improve productivity, everything could be fine-tuned with the right chemical recipe. It was in this cultural atmosphere that Black Beauties emerged as an emblem of the perfect blend between human ambition and pharmaceutical might. But to understand why the 50-50 formula became the secret weapon of Black Beauties, we must revisit the story of two forms of amphetamine, amphetamine sulfate and dextroamphetamine sulfate. Both compounds belong to the family of powerful central nervous system stimulants, but they are not the same. Amphetamine produces a broad, expansive surge, a wave of power that pushes the entire nervous system into overdrive. Dextroamphetamine, on the other hand, is sharper, more refined, piercing directly into the centers of pleasure, focus, and motivation. It does not strike as forcefully as amphetamine, but it penetrates deeper into the dopamine system, sharpening alertness and elevating mood like the point of a needle. When these two substances were blended at a 50-50 ratio, the result was not merely additive. It was synergistic, a state in which 1 + 1 does not equal 2, but something far greater. A kind of dual-engine compound that produced both explosive lift and razor-sharp clarity, a combination users often described as unlocking themselves. Imagine the body as a machine running at its usual pace. A single 50-50 Black Beauty is like activating two turbochargers at once, one boosting speed, the other fine-tuning precision. Their interplay creates an entirely new operational state, more focused, faster, tireless, unbound, and most of all, filled with a sense that one can do anything. That sense is what made Black Beauties both dangerously potent and irresistibly appealing. People did not take them merely to lose weight or stay awake. They took them to become the strongest version of themselves, or at least, what they believed that version to be. In medical reports and in the recollections of those who lived through that era, descriptions of the 50-50 effect share one common theme, a clear, uninterrupted energy. Not jittery like caffeine overload, not harsh like methamphetamine, not shimmering like cocaine. Instead, Black Beauties delivered a state of clean, straight-line momentum, into work, into goals, into whatever task lay ahead. And this delicate balance made Black Beauties the preferred choice of an entire generation, students chasing high grades, truck drivers crossing the country through the night, office workers striving for 200% productivity, models maintaining their figures, artists creating through dawn, and even housewives simply seeking enough energy to meet the day's endless demands. But beneath this seemingly perfect scientific equilibrium, the 50-50 formula hit a subtle trap. It made users unable to feel the full force of the drug's impact. The two compounds attacked from different angles, and when fused, the raw punch of amphetamine was softened by the precision of dextroamphetamine. Users did not feel they were going too fast. They did not sense their hearts racing. They did not notice dependency creeping closer. They only felt that they were better. This is what made Black Beauties far more dangerous than single-compound amphetamines. The 50-50 ratio aligned perfectly with America's cultural psychology at the time, the desire to exceed limits, to perfect oneself, but without feeling out of control. A pill both powerful and smooth, that was the dream of a generation obsessed with performance. The 50-50 formula also reflected the rigid logic of American science then. If amphetamine A was good for one purpose, and amphetamine B was good for another, mixing them must be even better. And in the short term, it was better for productivity, better for energy, better for weight control. But science of that era lacked what modern science considers essential, a long-term lens on physical, psychological, and societal effects. The synergistic effect of the 50-50 formula did not only amplify energy. It amplified risk, dependency, difficulty of withdrawal, and most of all, it amplified how quickly society embraced a drug this powerful as part of daily life. A single Black Beauty was no longer a prescription. It was a lifestyle. That is why, in hindsight, many researchers liken the 50-50 formula to a chemical multiplication so bold it bordered on arrogance, a gamble disguised in the language of utility, science, and performance optimization. But in that fever of productivity, no one realized that each pill was a doorway opening into a dark room. And once inside, finding the way back out was no simple task. The 50-50 formula was not an accident. It was intentional. It was the choice that made Black Beauties distinctive, stronger, more memorable, and far more addictive. And that very choice laid the foundation for the cultural explosion of Black Beauties in the decades that followed. Because when a pill can energize, delight, help one lose weight, and make one feel complete, it is no longer a medication. It becomes a promise. A privilege. A kind of enchanted key. But history has never been kind to promises that are too seductive. And for Black Beauties, the price of that too-perfect chemical formula would soon reveal itself. Now, to understand how this small black capsule evolved from a scientific design into a full-fledged social phenomenon, we move to the next chapter. Where Black Beauty stepped out of the laboratory and walked straight into American life as an icon of alertness, fashion, and the timeless human desire to exceed every limit. And once the 50-50 formula had been established as the chemical heart of Black Beauties, another question slowly emerged: how could a pill this forceful become a national phenomenon? Why did it not remain confined to clinics and hospitals, but instead slip into the wallets of students, the wardrobes of models, and the desk drawers of office workers? The answer lay not only in laboratories, but in the very fabric of American culture, a society racing against productivity, perfection, and the vast shadow of its own expectations. The 1950s through the 1970s were decades when America lived by performance. It was an era in which every individual, students, laborers, housewives, executives, felt as though they were running an endless race. The post-war economy was booming, consumer demand surged, companies battled fiercely for market share, and people chased the ideal of the American dream with the belief that if they could just push a little harder, find a little more energy, gain a little more speed, life would be better. But a little more always grew into even more. And even more soon expanded into a silent pressure threading through every corner of daily life. In everyday culture, Americans were encouraged to be energetic, alert, and efficient. Long work hours were no longer sacrifices, they became badges of honor. Productivity evolved into a kind of moral virtue. Society celebrated those who worked relentlessly and viewed anyone tired, sluggish, or lacking drive as simply not trying hard enough. It was within this atmosphere that small, potent, elegant black beauties appeared as the perfect answer for a society unwilling to slow down. Consumer culture and mass media reinforced this fixation on high performance. Advertisements depicted slim, radiant, tireless women using diet pills. Newspapers admired executives who worked through the night. Television shows idealized the busy American. And beneath it all was the whisper of a society that never truly allowed rest. Amphetamines, under numerous brand names, became emblems of modernity, of scientific progress, of using chemistry to optimize the human being. They were not just medications. They were a philosophy of life: no sleep, no slowing down, no stopping. Black Beauties entered this context like a puzzle piece that fit too perfectly. For students, especially in an era of intense academic competition, Black Beauties became a ticket to lights never off. When deadlines loomed, when exams piled up, when the pressure to succeed became suffocating, swallowing a black capsule to stay awake all night felt almost ordinary. For office workers, particularly the rising middle class, amphetamines, and Black Beauties in particular, became a quiet ally. They helped them stay sharp through back-to-back meetings, complete overwhelming workloads, and maintain the image of strength and control that society demanded. For artists, musicians, and writers, Black Beauties were seen as creative catalysts. Not as psychedelic as LSD, not as chaotic as heroin, but capable of lifting them into a crisp state of energized focus, weaving new ideas through the night. For women, especially those crushed under cultural expectations of thinness, amphetamines were framed as miracle diet pills. Just a few capsules and the weight dropped, energy rose, mood brightened. The pills reshaped not only bodies, but the way women were perceived, by society and by themselves. Such a culture did not merely use amphetamines. It idolized them. It turned them into a symbol of modern American life, fuel for the national engine. But the deeper truth was this: America was not only addicted to productivity. It was addicted to the feeling of control. The feeling of mastery over body, time, emotions, work, appearance. Amphetamines, and Black Beauties, gave them that illusion. A dazzling sense that with one small pill, no limit was unbreakable. And once productivity became sacred, the cost of achieving it grew blurry. No one wanted to look at the dark side of amphetamines. No one wanted to acknowledge that this free energy demanded a long-term price. No one wanted to admit that each pill was a dangerous loan, one that users would inevitably repay with their health, their minds, and their lives. Worse still, the government and medical establishment of the time helped accelerate the spread of amphetamines. Regulations were loose. Warnings were minimal. Limits were vague. Amphetamines were prescribed nearly as casually as aspirin. And in a society starving for speed, a drug that could accelerate almost became a national commodity. Black Beauties, therefore, were not merely chemical products. They were products of an era. Manifestations of mid-century America. A society filled with grand dreams, deep anxieties, invisible pressures, and an insatiable thirst for success. And the saddest truth was this: when a society values productivity more than well-being, and busyness more than peace, pills like Black Beauties stop being medicine. They become mirrors, reflecting a collective ambition that can shine brilliantly, or darken frighteningly. Within such a culture, Black Beauties thrive not only because their chemical design was ideal, but because the society around them was ideal for their ascent. A culture that made amphetamines not an exception, but an inevitability. And so, when Black Beauties spread like a storm, no one was truly surprised. America had already prepared itself to embrace them, and to pay the price, long after the fact. Now, to understand how these small black capsules embedded themselves into every layer of American life, we move to the next chapter, where Black Beauties emerged from the boundaries of medicine and transformed into a cultural icon, a fashionable accessory, and a national addiction. And once America had grown accustomed to running on productivity, once individuals began to see stimulants as a natural part of modern life, another force quietly entered the game. Silent, subtle, but more influential than any community of users. If Black Beauties spread like a storm, then the pharmaceutical marketing industry was the wind that fanned it into a wildfire. Because sometimes, the danger does not lie in the pill itself, but in the story people tell about it. During the 1960s and 1970s, the American pharmaceutical industry entered its golden age of advertising. It was no longer just soap, soda, or automobiles being promoted. Drug companies, too, became master storytellers. They understood that people did not buy medicine with logic alone. They bought with emotion, with the desire to become a better version of themselves, with the belief that science could solve every difficulty in life. And in a society addicted to performance, Black Beauties were marketed as the legal miracle everyone had been waiting for. Instead of warning about their addictive potential, pharmaceutical companies emphasized phrases that sounded scientific yet harmless: mild invigoration. A soft, safe expression that made physicians reading medical journals or patients sitting in clinics feel as though they were simply using a daily energy-enhancing vitamin. This phrase became a perfect shield, masking the intense high and the long-term dependence that Black Beauties carried with them. The word mild was the magic trick. It transformed a powerful stimulant into a product that felt easy to use, easy to accept, and easy to welcome into the everyday lives of millions. It created the illusion that this was just a gentle push, a subtle assist, a small upgrade for a busy life. In the medical journals of the era, advertisements for Black Beauties were presented with a veneer of professionalism: sleek black capsules, tidy charts, endorsements from experts. Pharmaceutical companies wisely never described the feeling of euphoria. Instead, they focused on weight control, enhanced daily performance, and emotional stability. Concepts that felt legitimate, ethical, and clean. But beneath those polished words, the truth remained unchanged: Black Beauties were still pure amphetamine. And the drug companies knew it. One of their most sophisticated strategies was directing advertisements at women. A group pressured more than any other by expectations about appearance, energy, and responsibility. Images of neat, cheerful housewives who managed children in spotless homes were held up as symbols of the support Black Beauties provide. Slogans like "Maintain your shape," "Maintain your confidence," targeted the quiet but widespread insecurity of American women in that era. And women believed. Not just because the ads were beautiful, but because they were exhausted. They felt they had to be perfect in every role. They needed a tool. They needed something that would keep them from collapsing under the weight of family and societal expectations. Black Beauties met that need perfectly. Doctors, operating within a system with little oversight, also became victims of this marketing wave. Advertisements saturated medical journals, the very publications physicians trusted as authoritative scientific sources. When they saw the phrase, mild invigoration, repeated again and again, many believed that amphetamine had been refined into something gentler and safer. Many prescribed because they trusted the ads. Many prescribed because patients demanded it. And many prescribed because of profit, as distribution systems at the time allowed doctors to buy amphetamine cheaply and sell it for many times the cost. The pharmaceutical industry was not merely marketing a product. It was marketing a belief that amphetamine was an advanced medical solution. This belief spread so widely that risks such as dependence, arrhythmia, prolonged insomnia, or paranoia nearly vanished from medical conversations. A crucial factor was how drug companies avoided the word addiction. In the 60s and 70s, addiction was associated with heroin, opiates, and illegal drugs. By framing amphetamine as a tool for weight loss or emotional stability, they lifted it out of the category of dangerous substances. They told a different story: this was medicine, not a drug. A tool, not a trap. And while popular media warned about LSD and cocaine, amphetamine flowed quietly and freely through the legal system, calm, unchallenged, unquestioned. It became so normal in American life that people forgot the intense high was not psychological, it was chemical. Pharmaceutical marketing blurred the line between medicine and stimulant. Once repeated long enough and widely enough, phrases like safe weight control, improved performance, and emotional enhancement became truths in the consumer's mind, truths built not through objective research, but through exceptional storytelling. The danger was simple: marketing did not lie. It merely told half the truth. It spoke of alertness, but not the sleepless nights that followed. It spoke of enhanced performance, but not that the enhancement existed only as long as the pills continued. It spoke of weight control, but not the physical exhaustion, uncontrolled heart rate, and dependency that hollowed users out from within. Marketing concealed addiction with soft vocabulary, clean imagery, and society's faith in science. And for that reason, it became the most powerful engine driving Black Beauties beyond clinics, beyond ethical boundaries, and into every corner of American life. The irony is stark. While anti-drug campaigns focused on the black market, the true crisis grew inside the white market, in polished clinics, among doctors in white coats and glossy pharmaceutical brochures. Dependence did not begin with needles or powder. It began with a legal promise: you will be healthier, slimmer, more efficient. That was the artistry of pharmaceutical marketing. And it was the tragedy of millions of Americans. Because when a story is told beautifully enough, people believe it long before they ever think to ask, what is that story hiding? Now, to understand how far Black Beauties spread, we must turn to the next link in the chain, where the healthcare system not only failed to stop the crisis, but inadvertently became the engine that fueled the amphetamine epidemic more powerfully than ever. And as the bright lights of the pharmaceutical market began to illuminate every corner of American life, while the glossy slogans and the promise of mild invigoration continued to lull millions into complacency, another machine, quieter, more pragmatic, and far more dangerous, had already begun to turn. This is where we step into a darker section of the picture, a place where medicine, clinics, and doctors were not merely three components of a healthcare system, but three interlocking gears in a vast engine of profit, in which human beings became streams of revenue and addiction became a business tool. To understand why quaaludes, along with countless other psychoactive drugs, could explode like a slow-burning wildfire that lasted for years, we must examine the ecosystem that looked legal on the surface but was frighteningly distorted underneath: the pill mills, prescription factories masquerading as clinics. These were places where the line between medical ethics and financial gain dissolved entirely, where doctors became operators, clinics became distribution counters, and pills became the fastest-moving commodity in the history of American healthcare. Pill mills were not dangerous criminal hideouts lurking in shadows. On the contrary, they sat proudly on busy streets, bright signs reading, "Clinic," operating with full licenses and complete administrative paperwork, at least on paper. Stepping inside, one did not feel they were entering a place of healing, but rather a transaction counter where health was sold like a quick service: pay, receive prescription, go home. Some clinics even offered bundles, monthly packages, or bulk prescriptions, as long as patients paid the recurring examination fees. And every signed prescription was not simply a treatment plan, but an invoice of profit. At the height of the Quaalude era, these clinics became golden destinations for anyone seeking euphoria, deep sleep, relief from tension, or simply the sensation of drifting away. All one had to do was describe a handful of vague symptoms: anxiety, fatigue, trouble sleeping, and the doctor, who should have known the dangers better than anyone, would cheerfully write a prescription. Not because they were uninformed, but because they understood all too well: every pill was money. Every returning patient was steady revenue. And every maintained addiction was a long-term contract of profit. Behind them, pharmaceutical companies did not stand idly by. They supplied not only the pills, but also marketing materials, sponsored conferences, funded travel, and even paid advisory fees to enthusiastic doctors. All of this was legal within the framework of the time, but the intention was unmistakable. The more doctors prescribed, the more patients consumed, the higher the sales climbed. Pill mills were merely the visible tip of the iceberg, yet that visible tip was where the entire pipeline from factory to mouth flowed with astonishing speed. Digging deeper, this warped ecosystem thrived because of a severe lack of oversight and a regulatory framework full of holes. Agencies had no prescription tracking systems, no way to monitor prescribing frequency, and no robust standards for behavioral pharmacology. Clinics opened as rapidly as mushrooms after rain, operating loudly, confidently, and almost completely unregulated. The result was millions of prescriptions issued each year, so many that pharmacies could no longer distinguish legitimate treatment from recreational consumption. And when the numbers became that large, when overprescribing turned from exception to norm, society gradually began viewing these medications as everyday utilities, no different from coffee or light alcohol. Yet beneath that smooth-running surface, quiet tragedies spread. Patients who merely wanted better sleep, more relaxation, or less stress slowly slipped into a cycle of tolerance. They needed higher doses, more frequent doses, and doctors, motivated by profit or by professional laziness, continued prescribing. There were no tapering plans, no serious warnings, no long-term monitoring. Patients were left to drift down a river whose endpoints were often severe addiction, overdose, or psychological dependence so deep that normal life became impossible. What is even more unsettling is that many doctors and pill mills were not merely negligent, they participated deliberately because the money was simply too easy. Some clinics earned hundreds of thousands of dollars per month just from signing prescriptions. Some doctors drove luxury cars and lived in lavish homes, their wealth built upon the ruined lives of thousands. And when investigations finally came, they hid behind excuses: "I followed protocol, patients reported symptoms, I cannot refuse if there is medical need." These hollow justifications only revealed the truth more plainly: human health had become a shield for greed. At the same time, it must be acknowledged that pill mills grew powerful partly because patient demand surged uncontrollably. A culture addicted to productivity, relentless work pressure, rapid urbanization, and profound social isolation pushed millions toward medication as the quickest, easiest escape. This was the intersection of personal responsibility, collective pain, and systemic failure. But instead of helping patients confront the roots of their suffering, pill mills offered a cheap, quick, and dangerous solution, covering every problem with a pill. And when a system becomes this distorted, it inflicts damage not only on individuals but on an entire profession. Ethical doctors were doubted. Patients who genuinely needed medication were scrutinized. Respectable clinics were lumped together with exploitative ones. Pill mills did not merely destroy public health. They eroded trust, the most essential currency of medicine. Their downfall came only when the DEA and federal investigators tightened enforcement, launched nationwide crackdowns, built prescription tracking systems, and flagged abuse through data. But by the time the campaigns began, millions of Americans were already dependent. The culture of everyday drug use was deeply entrenched. And what pill mills left behind was not only public health damage, but an entirely new black market. Counterfeit pills, adulterated drugs, fentanyl, substances far deadlier than anything before. In hindsight, the doctor-clinic pharmaceutical triad did not merely help turn Quaaludes into a symbol of abuse, it laid the foundations for today's opioid crisis. It demonstrated that when medical ethics fall beneath revenue, when oversight is weak, and when society seeks fast solutions instead of real healing, tragedy is not a possibility, it is inevitable. And it stands as a warning for every era. Healthcare cannot become a marketplace, and people cannot become units of profit. When those lines are crossed, history always repeats itself, only with a higher price each time. And as the pill mills operated like assembly lines for profit, pushing millions of pills into the market in an unstoppable current, the inevitable happened. They began to seep into every community, every social layer, every rhythm of American life. Pills that once came from the doctor's office were now stepping out onto the streets, making their way into bars, factories, dormitories, stages, and dance floors, slowly becoming an inseparable part of the nation's heartbeat. From this point, we move into one of the most memorable chapters of the story, the moment when Black Beauties were no longer just pills, but the fuel that kept America running. To understand why Black Beauties, the small, dark, potent amphetamine tablets, could sweep across the country like a storm, we must look at how America operated in the second half of the 20th century. This was an era of explosive growth, a booming economy, rapidly expanding cities, the rise of mass culture, and the crushing weight of productivity on each individual. People were not only expected to work, they had to work faster, harder, and more efficiently. In such an environment, Black Beauties became a perfect chemical engine. What is striking is that these pills did not spread within only one group but across countless communities, each adopting them in their own way, for their own reasons, yet all merging into the same larger truth: America was running on borrowed chemical energy. First came the manual laborers, especially those in factories, warehouses, and long-haul transportation. These were jobs that demanded endurance, prolonged alertness, and the ability to withstand relentless work cycles. Black Beauties became their silent companions, keeping them awake during night shifts, alert on endless highways, and shielded from exhaustion long enough to meet productivity demands. For them, the pill was not a pleasure, but a livelihood, something that kept their jobs, their income, and their families afloat. Parallel to this was another growing group of devoted users: college students. In a time when knowledge expanded quickly, academic pressure intensified, and society's expectations weighed heavily on the young, Black Beauties became the secret weapon for surviving sleepless nights, marathon exam sessions, long papers, and the increasingly demanding pace of higher education. For many students, the pills were a life raft in an ocean of pressure. And, like all chemical life rafts, they came with a terrible price. The creative community, artists, musicians, dancers, was no exception. For them, Black Beauties prolonged euphoria, stretched performance hours, sharpened confidence, and kept the spirit soaring. In the world behind the stage lights, where emotion erupted and expectations knew no limits, these tiny tablets became the hidden fuel behind countless dazzling performances. But beyond work, school, and art, Black Beauties crept into American popular culture, into parties, bars, and nightclubs. They became symbols of speed, intensity, a live fast lifestyle. These pills made people alert, talkative, energetic, able to dance all night without fatigue. They were called beauties not only for their color, but for the beautifully false sensations they created. And as with all stimulants, Black Beauties soon drifted past their original purpose and became a companion during hard times. Single mothers juggling 2 jobs, office workers crushed by deadlines, soldiers needing to stay sharp under extreme pressure, all turned to the pills to bridge the gap between society's demands and human limitations. What all Black Beauties users had in common was simple: America was moving too fast. Too fast for human bodies to keep up. Too fast for society to adjust before harm spread. And in that speed, people found chemicals to be the artificial gear that allowed them to survive in an urban machine spinning out of control. The sad truth is that when a stimulant becomes widely accepted across society, it stops being seen as dangerous and instead becomes part of daily life. Not only did users believe they were in control, society also quietly accepted it as normal. Who doesn't need to work a little harder? Who doesn't need extra energy? Who doesn't want to stay awake? And when such questions become excuses, Black Beauties move from the realm of medicine to the realm of everyday convenience, like strong coffee or energy drinks, only far more powerful. More troubling still, once a substance is socially normalized, dependency grows silently and deeply. Users increase their doses, seek more pills, and depend on the drug to maintain ordinary functioning. This dependency is not loud or dramatic at first, it is persistent, quiet, and corrosive. People begin to feel that without the pills, they are missing some of their energy, unable to focus, not themselves anymore. And that is the moment Black Beauties begin to take command. From a cultural and social perspective, the spread of Black Beauties across so many groups revealed a larger truth: America had built a lifestyle too difficult to reach, too demanding of its people, and too willing to rely on drugs to compensate for human exhaustion. When productivity becomes the measure of worth, anything that accelerates performance becomes a coveted commodity. In factories, people used Black Beauties to earn enough to live. In schools, to avoid falling behind. In the arts, to shine. In everyday life, simply to avoid collapsing. Together, these forces created a relentless cycle. Society demanded speed, the pills provided speed, people grew accustomed to speed, and speed became the new standard. Looking back, it is clear that the widespread use of Black Beauties was a symptom of an even deeper national ailment: the collective exhaustion of a country always running, always striving, always pushing past its limits. Instead of asking, "Why are these pills dangerous?" Americans of that era were forced to confront a more difficult question: why do we need them so much? Because once a nation must rely on stimulants to function, the story is no longer just about the pills. It is about the structure of society itself. And in the very moment Black Beauties became the unofficial fuel of America, the first flashes of an impending crisis appeared, a quiet beginning to a chain of tragedies the nation would pay for over the decades that followed. And when Black Beauties had seeped into every corner of American life, from factories to lecture halls, from offices to nightclubs, from long-haul trucks to blazing stages, a quiet, unavoidable question began to take shape. What happens when those glossy black capsules no longer deliver the magic energy they once promised? It was at the very moment Black Beauties became the fuel of an entire generation that the first cracks began to spread, leading us into the next chapter, where the consequences of amphetamine misuse would reveal themselves with all their harshness and devastation. For so long, Americans saw in Black Beauties only speed, alertness, sharpness, and a sense of control. But there is a law of nature that no stimulant can escape: what rises must fall, and the faster the ascent, the harder the crash. Amphetamine was never just a miracle of productivity, it was a double-edged blade waiting for its moment to tighten. The first and most obvious consequence was tolerance. The human body is remarkable, but that very adaptability makes it the enemy of every stimulant. After only a few weeks of using Black Beauties, the brain begins to treat amphetamine as a familiar signal. The doses that once brought euphoria, clarity, and energy now felt merely normal. To recreate those early effects, users had to increase the dose, then increase it again, and again. And so, tolerance became a spiral that few could escape. If one 10 mg pill once kept you awake all evening, months later even 3 would no longer suffice. The brain's biology forced users deeper into dependence. Because natural dopamine had been banked away, the brain stopped making it, responding only to the artificial flood of the drug. When the pill was absent, the body fell into emptiness, heavy, drained, and dull, convincing users that they needed the pill just to feel like themselves. But the truth was the opposite: they were simply trying to reclaim what the drug had taken from them. After tolerance came dependence. If tolerance was biological adaptation, dependence was psychological captivity. Users did not only increase their dose, they used the pills because they feared they could not function without them. Each morning with heavy eyelids, each sluggish hour at work, every deadline that crept ever closer, all drove them back to the black capsule as a mental crutch. This dependence was particularly dangerous because it unfolded quietly. There was no dramatic moment of realization, no single turning point. Only countless tiny decisions repeated over time: one pill to extend a work shift, one pill to stay focused in a meeting, one pill to complete an exam, one pill to soothe a difficult day. These small acts accumulated into shackles. And once dependence reached a certain threshold, the accidents began. Not small mishaps, but life-altering events. Long-haul drivers, riding a wave of prolonged stimulation, suddenly crashed, collapsing at the wheel. Factory workers lost focus when their minds plunged after hours of continuous dosing. Students, drained after exams, spiraled into panic, trembling, their hearts racing so wildly they needed hospitalization. Performers crumbled after a show, slipping into paranoia as their overstressed brains buckled under pressure. Amphetamine did more than stimulate the mind, it forced the heart to beat faster, pushed blood pressure higher, and kept the body in a constant state of metabolic burn. Users often skipped meals, went without sleep, drank too little water, and denied the body its restorative cycles. This led to cases of total physical exhaustion, weakened muscles, stressed hearts, collapsing immune systems. And in the most severe instances, heart failure or stroke struck, tragedies predictable yet rarely warned against. Worse still, the mental exhaustion was more merciless than the physical. Once accustomed to chemically induced euphoria, the brain no longer knew how to find joy in natural ways. Every emotion became a faded version of itself. Happiness felt incomplete. Calmness grew distant. Focus turned fragile. Without the pill, everything was gray. With the pill, everything was strained. People stood between two edges with no way out. The substance that once whispered, "This is real energy," now took away both real and artificial energy altogether. Users still tried to run, but every step grew heavier. They pushed through their tasks, but productivity no longer increased, only depletion did. Their bodies waned while their minds slipped deeper into the dark vacuum of dopamine scarcity. One of the most devastating consequences was the amphetamine crash, the plunge that followed the high. If Black Beauties created an artificial peak, the crash was an endless pit. It was not mere fatigue. It was emptiness, sluggishness, sadness, aching muscles, dulled cognition, and sometimes a feeling of hopelessness. The only escape was another dose. And that, inevitably, became the engine of addiction. Once this spiral began, it could not be stopped by willpower alone. The brain had been rewired to depend on amphetamine, and the body was too depleted to recover without time and medical support. Stories of accidents, collapse, and tragedy began to surface everywhere. Workers fainting on the job, students hospitalized for arrhythmias, performers sinking into severe depression, drivers causing catastrophic accidents after hours of relentless dosing, and countless ordinary people so drained that they could no longer return to their normal lives. Black Beauties, once a tool for productivity, had become the root of countless personal and communal disasters. America began to realize that it had been running on a fragile chemical foundation. And the cost was no longer confined to individual bodies, but was now echoing across the entire society. Because when a nation becomes dependent on amphetamines, every accident is no longer due. Personal failure. It is the consequence of a system, a culture, and an era that pushed human beings far beyond their natural limits. And from the weight of these accumulating consequences, the first warning bell began to toll, marking the path toward the inevitable downfall of Black Beauties in the next chapters of the story. And when the consequences could no longer be dismissed, when every layer of American society began to feel the true cost of that borrowed chemical energy, the nation was finally forced to confront the truth. Black Beauties were not merely the story of individuals collapsing under exhaustion, they were the story of a system that had been misaligned from the very beginning. From explosion to depletion, from productivity to breakdown, the journey of the black capsule had reached its final point. And it was in that seemingly darkest moment, when every fracture lay exposed, that America began to witness the inevitable collapse of what had once been praised as a perfect solution. If the rise of Black Beauties had been a symbol of America's near-blind faith in science and productivity, then their downfall became a quiet reminder that no system, no matter how legal, sophisticated, or wealthy, can stand when its foundation is built on a distorted understanding of human limits. Every pharmaceutical epidemic has its beginning, and it also has the moment when its time must end. For Black Beauties, that moment arrived in the late 1970s, when both the FDA and the DEA were finally compelled to act. Yet this collapse did not unfold overnight. It was not loud, nor dramatic in the way Hollywood might imagine. Instead, it arrived quietly but unmistakably, like the final flicker of a neon lamp that had burned through too many nights. The first signs appeared when medical reports and hospital data recorded rising numbers of cases, exhaustion, psychosis, cardiovascular crises, and deaths linked to amphetamines. The frightening part was not that these numbers increased, but that for so long, no one had bothered to count them. The FDA began demanding that pharmaceutical companies prove the safety of amphetamines under new, stricter standards. But no company could solve that equation, because amphetamine had never been a healing drug, it only produced a temporary state of artificial comfort. As the evidence accumulated, the FDA tightened prescribing rules and forced manufacturers to withdraw many formulations from the market. The DEA stepped in with a clear agenda: control the supply chain, crack down on pill mills, regulate active ingredients more closely, and classify amphetamine under stricter schedules. A distribution system once built on lenient private clinics, irresponsible physicians, and massive public demand began to fracture. Factories that once produced amphetamine at industrial scale reduced operations or shut down entirely. Doctors who had prescribed thousands of pills each month were investigated, stripped of licenses, even prosecuted. But the collapse did not unfold only within legal corridors or government offices. It took place inside the American psyche itself. After years of chasing productivity, people began to look inward, at their bodies, at their routines, and at the undeniable consequences around them: exhausted co-workers, deteriorating family members, strange little tragedies occurring with such frequency they no longer felt surprising. This awakening was not loud, it was like a cold breeze slipping through a doorway, quiet, but enough to make everyone understand that the era of the black capsule had reached its end. Yet the fall of Black Beauties did not erase their legacy. Instead, those remnants became woven into the culture and medical system of modern America. Amphetamine disappeared from its role as a miracle diet pill, but it returned in another form, cleaner, regulated, but built upon the same chemical core. Adderall, Vyvanse, Dexedrine, they are all legal descendants of an era once shaped by amphetamine's power. This was no coincidence. Americans never stopped longing for productivity. They still yearned to work faster, focus better, and push through fatigue more effectively. And as long as that desire lives on, stimulants, whether amphetamines or their refined variations, will always find a place. Black Beauties vanished from the surface, but their spirit lingers in every modern ADHD pill. The culture of stimulant consumption also never disappeared. It was simply reframed, made more rational, more palatable. But the core question that Black Beauties raised remains untouched. Where is the line between productivity and misuse? The modern American healthcare system has improved its controls, but it still faces the same pressures that shaped the 1960s, patients demanding quick results, physicians rushed for time, pharmaceutical companies seeking profit, and a society that treats success as an obligation. For that reason, Black Beauties became a legacy, not in a beautiful sense, but in a cautionary one. They stand as proof that quick fixes, chemical promises, and flawless marketing campaigns can all turn into epidemics when they strike at human fear and ambition. And more importantly, Black Beauties reveal that an epidemic does not need criminals or hidden conspiracies to emerge. It can be created legally, openly, transparently, by the very institutions meant to protect people: doctors, clinics, pharmaceutical firms, regulatory bodies. When an entire system grows careless, or grows aligned around profit and societal pressure, an epidemic is not just possible, it is inevitable. In the end, when the black capsules disappeared from pharmacy shelves, when their glossy advertisements faded into the past, Black Beauties left behind a question that still echoes today: has modern society truly learned from an era overstimulated into collapse, or have we merely replaced one form of stimulant with another? There is no definitive answer. But when we look back on the journey of Black Beauties, from a symbol of chemical perfection to a milestone in cultural crisis, we understand that those black capsules never truly vanished. They simply changed shape, changed their names, changed their purposes, while the drive for productivity and the weight of pressure continue to pulse through the rhythm of modern life. And that is the true legacy of Black Beauties, a mirror reflecting not only America's past, but also our present. Where people still search for swift miracles to escape their weariness, sometimes forgetting that no miracle comes without a price. As we close the journey through the rise and fall of Black Beauties, we are left facing a sobering truth: sometimes the things created to make people stronger become the quiet spark that burns an entire generation from within. The issue here was never just a diet pill containing amphetamine. It was the way the healthcare system, the culture, and the market, whether unintentionally or deliberately, joined forces to create an addiction that was legal, sophisticated, and far more widespread than anyone could have imagined. And in this video, you have witnessed the full cycle, from the moment Black Beauties were hailed as salvation for human exhaustion, to the point where they became symbols of depletion, disarray, and despair. But the value we hope to leave you with goes beyond recounting a dark past. By understanding the mistakes that gave rise to Black Beauties, we can recognize the patterns repeating today: beautiful promises, safe technologies, products polished with convenience but hiding unpredictable risks. History reminds us that nothing is more dangerous than what makes us believe we are in control, when in reality, we are simply being carried along. If you wish to continue exploring forgotten stories, the hidden corners that history tries to conceal, stay with us in the videos ahead. The things you think you already know, may only now be beginning to reveal themselves.